decide what they want to happen. They need to know what happened to, I lost my uncle, as you're well aware, James, and I need to know what happened to him before I can even start to think about moving on or closure. 5 years people have been waiting, don't have death certificates yet. Those are the things, that process needs to happen before there's. And when I say consultation, as we've just seen with the PEEP situation, there was a consultation, and despite what the majority thought, government have gone against it. So the consultation needs to be very meaningful. It needs to be very individual. It can't be a collective view. Everyone's voice needs to be heard in that process. And then whatever, then we have to kind of talk about decision, how, what, where, and when. As I say, for me, I'm going to say this selfishly, as personally, I'm happy that's how to stay up. It's a stark reminder of what happens when you don't do things right, when you cut corners, when greed and profits come before people's safety. That's a stark reminder of that, and we'll remain it. But equally, on the flip side of that, I understand the impact that it has on this community.
Of course. Natasha, thank you.
You're most welcome.
Well, I never know what to say at the end of conversations like this one, so I'll just remind you that you'll always have a platform here to be heard on this programme. Natasha Alcott, the chair of Grenfell United, helping us remember today the 5th anniversary of that tragedy. And it's one of those events that feels as if it could have been yesterday or 100 years ago. Do you know what I mean by that? I'm speaking not to Natasha now, because if I had been there that night, I wouldn't have anything like the perspective that I have upon events that I have today. But it could have been yesterday, and it could have been 100 years ago. It's so completely sort of baked in to memory and to consciousness. But I said it at the outset, and I'll say it again. It was almost unbearable being at work that day. People ringing from the scene, firefighters barely able to breathe, who just got out of there, people describing circumstances that were almost unbelievable, and which had been forewarned. That was the most incredible thing. Very, very early on, it was Twitter really started ringing with the references to the blog that had the Grenfell Action Group that had been warning about all of this stuff. And I read some of that, and it was right in the middle of fake news type territory, and it was a really weird time when facts were under siege from some of the most powerful people in the world. So your brain went to strange places. I hope you don't mind me sharing this. Your brain went to, and you started thinking, has somebody already put together some sort of hoax? Because the idea that people living in the block were writing this a year ago, 2 years ago, and now we're watching the block burn. Your brain went to the strangest of places, thinking that there'd been some sort of conspiracy hoax, or some mischievous miscreants had spent the morning trying to make it look as if this had been warned against. And then as the morning progressed and we looked at it more and we talked about it more, you realise that it really was almost crystal clear predictions of the tragedy. And I mention that because 5 years later, whether inevitably or not, I do not know, and Natasha doesn't know either, whether or not more things could have happened more quickly, we do not know. But 5 years later, that simple single fact that it was warned about so regularly and so righteously is, for me, one of the hardest things to get over. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The time now is 11:45. 11:48 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The current advisor on ministerial standards has been before Select Committee today. Theo Ushwood has been paying attention to that. Shall we summon him, find out what Lord Geit has been saying? Can we summon the Ushwood, please, Keith? Thank you. But before that, Ruth in Hemel Hempstead is going to steer us back to the conversation about huge numbers, or a huge number of job vacancies, and what that might mean for society in general. Ruth, what can you tell us?
Yeah, morning, James.
Hello, Ruth.
Well, I'm calling you as an HR consultant, so I have
I didn't do it. Keith's lying.
I know. So I have lots of clients saying exactly what you've just been saying. They can't recruit.
Right.
They've got loads of vacancies. And they're sort of scratching their heads, wondering what to do about it. Unfortunately, I don't have a magic wand and the perfect answer as to what needs to change, because I think it's a combination of several things. One is what you were talking about yesterday, the 50 pluses, of which I am one,
yes.
are leaving the workforce because a very good friend of mine, for example, who's in her mid-50s and in HR, for several decades, left her employer and decided after COVID, do you know what, I'm not going to go back. Now works at the local cafe 3 shifts a week and finds that just completely stress-free, and it's a work-life balance thing for her.
Yeah, and that's going to be a large...
at one end of the age spectrum, but then at the other end of the age spectrum, I've got another couple of anecdotes, again, from friends in HR who's got kids in their 20s.
Right.
And saying, I just despair of my kids because they're not entering the workplace. And
what are they doing?
For a lot of those, well, when I say not entering the workplace, they are working. So one of them's working at an Outward Bound centre, and he works there during the summer months with people, for kids from primary schools on their residential trips, and young people. Loves it. And then when the summer season is over, comes back home to mum and dad.
Yeah.
And does a local job, probably in hospitality or retail. And he's been doing that for a few years now.
So he's working to live. He's not embarked on what our generation would have called...
Mum and dad, you see.
Yeah,
so
no, exactly that.
It's not like I was in my mid-20s when I graduated and thought, right, I need to get a job and I need to pay rent, and I moved out of home as soon as I could.
But you also wanted to get a career, not just a job.
Well, this is it. And I think it's a work-life balance for a lot of those people in that age group. And they're saying, I've seen what mum and dad did. I saw them bust a gut, get completely stressed out, some of them burnt out. They're working ridiculous hours a week. Why the hell would I want that? I don't want that lifestyle. Because
the rewards are not as big as that they would need to be to justify that lifestyle. I was talking about this at the weekend to a partner in a city law firm, actually, where obviously the rewards are immense, but the workload is epic. And
it's ridiculous.
It's a lot easier to make sense of the workload if the rewards are immense, whereas you look at mum and dad and you think, well, they're not exactly living it up, and yet they've broken their backs working over the years. I think I might juggle things slightly differently moving forward.
I don't want perhaps the lifestyle that I observed them having when I was growing up, and they were both working all hours, and do I really want to have the same? And then, of course, there's a demographic issue, because, as we know, people have been having less kids. So there just aren't the number.
There's a lot going on here. There's a lot going on here.
Either.
And I wonder, having been patting myself on the back for stumbling across it a little bit ahead of the rest of the media, I wonder if the 50-something phenomenon is actually going to be the smallest element of this, because so much of it seems to be linked to a COVID-related recalibration. Mm-hmm. That the further COVID disappears into the rearview mirror, the less likely it is that people are going to be recalibrating their lives as a consequence of COVID. These kids in their 20s, and I shouldn't say kids, but I just did. These people in their 20s who are actually having more of a holistic recalibration. They're recalibrating entire lives still to be lived, are probably going to be a more significant part of this issue than their parents' generation.
And they've also got the issue of affordability, because it's really tough for them to get on the housing ladder.
No. They just need to cancel Netflix and stop eating avocados, Ruth. Do keep up.
Smashed avocado and sourdough.
That's the one.
The other thing I wanted to mention,
quickly, Theo's here now, and you know what he's like, Ruth. Theo's in the studio now.
Value of jobs and meaningful jobs. Because a lot of these vacancies you're talking about, loads and loads of vacancies, and not enough people to fill them. And the value of those jobs, are they meaningful work, or are they minimum wage? Low value, dead end jobs, dare I say it, and that's an issue too. And what employers have got to do is really start investing in things like AI not to save costs, but to make jobs more meaningful. Because if you use artificial intelligence to get rid of the drudgery and the stuff that no one wants to do anymore, but you don't use it to save people costs, you use it to make those jobs more meaningful so that people want to do them. Yeah. And then you can pay them better as well. And that's something that needs to be addressed by lots of employers too.
Covered a lot of ground there. I can't fault a single thing you've said, not largely because you can speak from experience and expertise. It'll never catch on. Ruth, thank you so much. Wayne's pointed out that we could hear Theo Usherwood come into the studio today. He says, my Beats headphones don't miss anything because of the squeaking studio door. Keith, can we get some WD-40 or something like that? If Wayne's hearing it in Basildon, then goodness knows. It's not your fault, mate. You didn't. It's the door, isn't it? Squeaky door. Speaking of meaningful jobs, Lord Geit has been talking to a select committee this morning.
So Lord Christopher Geit is the independent advisor on ministerial standards. There's just a bit you need to know before we get into exactly what he's got to say. When Partygate happened, he did not have the power to initiate his own investigation. That had to come from, the initiation of any investigation had to come from the Prime Minister. Since Partygate happened, he has been given the power to initiate his own investigation, except in matters of national security. So he can launch his own investigation. Now, William Ragg is chairman of the Public Administration Committee, and he asked Lord Geit whether he thought it was slightly odd that he's got this new power to initiate his own investigation, but only after Partygate.
I mean, it's a little bit odd, isn't it, that you have a revision of the code, enhanced powers given to you, that if they were in place when, topical matters came to light, such as a fixed penalty notice, would result in you being able to initiate an investigation. I mean, is it odd? Is it a matter of timing? What do you put it down to?
Sorry, why I have suddenly come into this new power, as it were,
why after the event and the ability of you to do anything under the previous iteration of the code? It's a bit odd.
Well, I'm glad that I've now got the new power, and to your and Mr. Cohen's question, I'm not going to be restrained from using it where necessary.
This was a Westminster masterclass, James, in saying something and nothing all at the same time. You could hear the way that Lord Geit tried to evade that question. He was then asked by the Labour MP, John McDonnell, whether he'd even asked the Prime Minister at the height of the Partygate if he could launch his own inquiry into whether the Prime Minister broke the ministerial code.
Even under the old powers, you still had the opportunity to raise the matter with the Prime Minister, yes, to request initiation of inquiry.
Absolutely.
Did you?
And that is precisely what my standing advice had been since both first the Cabinet Secretaries and then Sue Gray's report was initiated, and then subsequently when the Metropolitan Police. So the standing position there was to make sure that there was a publicly articulated position by the Prime Minister. He should use the opportunities that were available to him to put that into the public square.
That's somewhat asking the Prime Minister to make a form of a statement is different from you asking the Prime Minister to undertake a formal investigation. Did you ask him to enable you to perform your role to initiate an investigation?
No, I didn't.
Go on.
No, he's just saying he didn't even ask to launch an investigation.
He's not. Listen, you're more in your comfort zone with this stuff than I am, but he's not sounding terribly independent to me.
No, he's not.
I'm an asset, if you like, of the Prime Minister as a Minister of the Crown, rather than a free orbiting advisor with a different source of authority.
It's not independent, effectively. The appointments process, for instance, is the Prime Minister who decides in terms of appointments. I just find it slightly disingenuous in terms of the emphasis that we put on independence, because at the moment that certainly isn't the case, in my opinion. Would you agree?
I think we can agree to the extent that the new terms of reference show that there is some small limitation on the capacity of the independent advisor to be truly independent.
So he's not independent. So this is the sum of what Lord Guyte has been saying. We had Partygate. Lord Guyte didn't have the power to ask for an inquiry. He didn't ask for an inquiry. But he did ask the Prime Minister to issue a statement, which the Prime Minister did. Therefore, in Lord Guyte's view, an inquiry wasn't needed. But he can now ask for an inquiry if he wants to ask for an inquiry.
Just do that again, will you?
Right. So Partygate happened.
Yeah.
Lord Guyte, at the time, didn't have the power to ask for an inquiry into whether the Prime Minister broke the Ministerial Code. So he didn't ask for an inquiry into whether the Prime Minister broke the Ministerial Code.
Right.
But he did ask, as you heard him answering John McDonnell's question, for the Prime Minister to issue his own statement, which the Prime Minister did. And surprise, surprise, the Prime Minister didn't think that he broke the Ministerial Code. Mm. Therefore, in Lord Guyte's view, an inquiry wasn't needed into whether the Prime Minister broke the Ministerial Code.
Because the Prime Minister had decided that he hadn't broken the Ministerial Code.
In his statement, which Lord Guyte asked to issue in a statement. But he didn't ask.
This is as mad as I feared. I thought I'd lost concentration halfway through this thing, and I was a bit embarrassed to admit it. But it is actually as bonkers as I was beginning to fear here.
It is quite bonkers, yes.
So have you read
to
Catch-22?
Your word, by the way.
Have you read Catch-22 by Joseph Heller?
Brief.
There are some flights of fancy in there that are... I mean, Catch-22 fundamentally is that you can't go home from the war by pleading insanity, because if you want to go home from the war, you can't possibly be insane.
Right.
Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
That's Catch-22. But some of the exchanges between Major and Yossarian are surreal, and we're in that kind of territory here. So he didn't call an inquiry into whether the Prime Minister had broken the Ministerial Code because the Prime Minister had made a statement in which he insisted that he hadn't broken the Ministerial Code.
He did ask him to make that statement as to whether he'd broken the Ministerial Code.
And at that point, the necessity of an inquiry into whether or not he's broken the Ministerial Code somehow disappeared.
Yes, but he didn't have the power to ask whether he could launch an inquiry into the Ministerial Code being broken.
But he didn't even try. He could have asked.
No, because he didn't have the power.
He could have asked.
Yes, he could have asked.
But he didn't ask.
No, he didn't ask.
Is there any more?
Well, he was asked just now by John McDonnell again whether he'd ever considered resigning.
There are a few instruments available to an independent advisor, and important to consider what is going to work best in the interest not of me, but of preserving the integrity of the system and of the code, and in making it work in advising the Prime Minister on holding ministers, including a Prime Minister, publicly to account. So, again, I haven't given you a direct answer, but I don't think there was ever a single direct proposition in my own mind.
I'm going to take that answer as at least it was on the agenda.
We've mentioned before in evidence that it's always on the agenda as an available remedy to a particular problem, and one that my predecessor indeed exercised in November.
I'm very late for the news because I fell down some sort of vortex. If we come back after the news and start again, will I understand it any better? Yeah, we may find... I don't know if I can bear it, actually. It's 5 minutes after 12. I was joking about doing it all again.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's all right. I mean, we can if you want, but we're not going to get any clearer. I mean, that was just an exercise in... I mean, that's why they wrote Yes, Minister, isn't it? Because of moments like that. Essentially. Yes. If you think of any zingers...
Yes, Minister wasn't 40 years old, then you'd probably think that this one came first.
Yeah, you would. Absolutely incredible. So is he going to resign or not?
So he had two thoughts in his head, James. Yeah. One was that he should resign, and one was that he shouldn't resign.
Right.
But of course, that's the same of anybody thinking about resigning.
Yeah.
If you're going to resign, there will be an element of you which thinks, well, actually, I'm not going to resign. So what he does, and what's quite clever about it, is that he states the obvious, but in this drawn-out version with lots of long words.
Was he at school with Johnson? Did he?
I don't think so.
And does he think Johnson broke the Ministerial Code or not? I am absolutely none the wiser.
No, we don't know that.
So what was the point of the testimony?
He suggested that Johnson broke the Ministerial Code, but he hasn't said explicitly that the Prime Minister, broke the Ministerial Code.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I mean, well, what a time to be alive. There you go. What can I say? I've got Theo currently has two thoughts in his head. Is he going to leave the studio or is he going to stay in the studio? Let's see if the door squeaks this time. No, no, It's fine now. It's mad, this door, isn't it? See if you can hear it tomorrow when I come in just before the end of Nick's show. Just listen out for it, and it will be in the background. Sometimes sets Nick off. Nick gets the giggles a bit, so just listen out for that tomorrow morning. 7 minutes after 12 is the time. And a few class points coming into the studio, as ever. Armando Iannucci couldn't do any better. That's a good one. And if Lord Geit spoke with a Cockney accent, James, he'd be laughed out of the room. That was the other accent-based story that we were thinking of talking about today. The northern accents, people with northern accents. Research, in fact, shows that there is prejudice against northern accents in England, and that people who perhaps say Bath instead of Bath, or would put a plaster on a cut, are going to be wrongly adjudged to be less intelligent than how posh people talk. And perhaps appropriately, the story is illustrated with a picture of Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's very posh and very stupid, and Jess Phillips, who's very bright but has a strong Birmingham accent. So there's a 4 years' worth of research into this at Northumbria University, which speaks of a fairly ugly bias against northern accents, which... Remind me, we'll keep that one in the fridge, yeah? I don't want to say goodbye to that one, but it got overtaken. Can you believe it? You know I love accents. I don't know why I love accents. I just love accents. I'm fascinated by accents. This is going to sound a bit pathetic, but it was almost a chat-up technique when I was at university, and I just had a very good ear for someone whose accent was identical to someone I already knew. And because I'd spent my year off in the Northwest, I was hoping to get to Goa, like all the other public school cliches on a gap year, but I ended up in Chorlton-cum-Hardy for reasons that I'll share with you if we ever have a pint together. But I got quite good at being able to pinpoint Northwest villages, even sort of down to quite small villages. And it was a bit of a party trick because I had a wonderful ear for identical accents. So someone that I already knew spoke with a recognisable accent, then I met someone else whose accent was bang on, then I would be able to say, "You're not from Northwich, are you?" or something like that. And it was rare for people in London from the north to be described so specifically rather than just to being to say, that accent, I think I said, "You're a northerner, are you?" So that's one of the reasons why I love accents. And I used to try to do them a lot. And then, of course, there's the posh thing. There's the private school thing where you hide your accent in many circumstances, in many contexts. It was called Mockney when I left school. Guy Ritchie was a key. His mother, Guy Ritchie, who made Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, his mother, I think, was chair of the local Conservative Association in Kensington, but he often, when interviewed, sounded like one of the characters in his own film. So I don't know why I find accents fascinating, but I do. And as you'll know, if you listen to this programme on anything like a regular basis, I am also a lover of language. I love language. I love words. I love what we can do with them, and I have a slight problem with snobbery, I think, when it comes to language. Not with accents. I have the opposite with accents. I'm very, very conscious of how wrongly we attribute intelligence to people who sound educated or posh, more pertinently. I think that is one of the main reasons why we're in such a clown show of government at the moment. I mean, who do you think's cleverer, Professor Brian Cox or Jacob Rees-Mogg, for example? And yet Brian has quite a strong accent as well. But it's not so much accents that we are talking about next as language itself. So something called multicultural London English has been identified by academics who say that social media platforms and grime music specifically are spreading or helping to spread multicultural London English, and it could become Britain's dominant dialect within 100 years. And I'm not quite sure what question I'm going to ask you yet, which is fine because I've got 3.5 minutes. But I am, and I don't want to be snobbish, and I certainly don't want to sound as if I'm criticising your children or your parenting skills, but I am intrigued by mums and dads who can't quite believe the way their children talk to their friends. That's your starter for 10 at 0345 6060973. So multicultural London English is, and I'm going with the description provided by the lecturer in linguistics at Oxford University, but as reported in the Daily Telegraph. So I may struggle to nail it down. I think you'd recognise it if you heard it. Some of the words that feature in this dialect. The Daily Telegraph writes, "Words to learn so you're not a waste man." which is actually quite funny. I've told you before, the news pages of the Telegraph are really rather good at the moment. It's just the comment pages that tend to contain more comedy than Netflix. So man is used as a pronoun. And is it used as a personal, is it used as a he or an I? So if I say man don't care, am I saying Keith doesn't care? Or am I saying I don't care, man don't care? So you tell me something, I say man don't care. Am I saying me or he? I don't know. And then, of course, you have mandem, which is a group of men, or my group of men, my mandem, my boys, if you like, my gang. And, of course, gyaldem is girls in the same context, a group of girls or a group of women. I think peng is on the way out now, isn't it? Is peng on the way out? I don't know that people still say peng, which was a synonym for attractive or good. Safe as an expression of approval. I'm terribly sorry, old fruits, but we were saying that at public school in the 1980s. That's safe. Or sound. Sound as a pound, we would say. It's sound. So that doesn't quite work. Crepes as shoes or trainers. Wasteman, as you've probably gathered, is a worthless individual. And lips apparently means to kiss. But the dialect, which also contains slang terms such as wagwan for what's going on and ends meaning neighbourhood. Bear is everywhere now, isn't it? Where you hear bear. Well, I think actually I'm trying to use the word bear to describe usage of the word bear. You hear the word bear everywhere to describe a lot. So you hear bear. It's bear. Bear is bear. Am I right? Have I used it correctly? I think I have. That's bear good. That's becoming common nationwide now, along as the use of man instead of I. So it's man as in man don't care means I don't care. So you say, you've got the highest listenership on this radio programme in the history of talk radio on commercial radio in Britain. I say man don't care. Man too modest or something like that. Is that right? Is that... Okay, the more I talk about it, the more relaxed I am about this. But, and the but is coming, we're also going to see dropping of H's becoming a thing of the past. Did you know that? Because multicultural London English speakers pronounce their H's in a way that traditional Cockney speakers do not. And it is the traditional Cockney way of speaking that has been largely replaced now in working class areas of London. And here's the bit that I probably need help with, because it's now being adopted in other cities as part of linguistic evolution that could see the emergence of a widespread multicultural British English. So MLE is poised to become MBE. A linguist, Dr. Rob Drummond, a linguist in looking at Manchester, suggests that grime artists have popularised the dialect. So they'd be largely London-based, but social media has seen them reach other corners of the country without perhaps the usual promotion or chart success that we would have had in previous eras. And he says, pre-social media, new slang and ways of speaking were spread through face-to-face contact. Now there are far more ways for people to communicate with each other and to share language. And I am once again conscious of the issue of deliberateness on this, because I was a bit of a sponge as a kid and a very impressionable. But I struggle to believe that I would have changed the way I spoke as a consequence of watching people I thought were cool on YouTube. But maybe I would. I don't know. Maybe I would. But that's the thing. So I think that mothers and fathers are going to be, and I should stress I'm not in this category. I think more perhaps through luck than judgment, if that's the right phrase. I think that you're going to be telling me, hopefully, about a degree of shock or even horror at the way your children have started speaking, because they must decide, mustn't they? At some point, surely when they're 5, they're not. I don't know. I don't want to sound. I don't think I'm sounding snobbish, but if I am, then I'll take my medicine. I just wonder whether people consciously decide to start talking like this, as well as just the style of speech evolving. So it is natural. It's I mean, if your parents speak like that, you're going to speak like this. That's often the way. But children speaking in a way that's completely at odds with how their parents talk and displaying, if you like, MLE or multicultural London English. It's spread among young people in communities whose parents did not speak English as their first language, or who had patois, with the influence maybe of Jamaican linguistic features in the dialect. So that kicked off in working class areas of London, but it's now spreading and interacting with local accents, meaning that you're getting regional variation. So just be my guinea pigs, but also my researchers on this. Give me a ring and talk about this issue however you please. 0345 6060 973. But as parents, are you struggling with your child's mode of speech? And ideally that mode of speech will be, whether you knew it or not 5 minutes ago, it will be multicultural London English. 12:17 is the time. It is 12:19. I'm not suggesting it's new, but the spread of it is, to the point where it could be the most dominant dialect in Britain within 100 years, which is, I mean, impossible to completely predict accurately, because you'll never know. But no one is suggesting it's new. I appreciate that. So don't ring in to tell me that I'm sounding even more out of touch than I have already acknowledged. Sarah's in Croydon. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello. I'm a bit nervous. I've never done this before.
What on earth are you doing?
I don't know. I just I heard what you were saying and thought, oh my God, this is my life.
That is the best compliment you can pay a phone-in host, Sarah. That is the finest compliment. Oh my God, this is my life.
You're welcome. Anytime, Jane.
Anytime. Thank you. Go on, tell me more.
Well, so I was just saying to your producer, she said, why have you called? And I said, it's literally, this is the conversation I have with my husband on a daily basis. We have a very beautiful, lovely, white British 15-year-old daughter, but we live in a wonderfully multicultural part of London. Love it. All walks of life. She's got lots of different friends. But literally about a year ago it started, and now it's just constant. The words that she uses, she has to actually educate me. I have to have lessons to understand. And a lot of it, she's saying some really nice things to me. She said to me the other day that, Mum, you look really peng, which is not going out, James. They still use it. Is it not? Yeah. And I was like, what on earth's that? And then I thought, I'll take it. I'll take the compliment. But but also she used to be so well-spoken. We used to get complimented by people. Oh. And it was so lovely. Yeah. And now it's like there's, the THs have gone and all of that. So we pick her up on that. But it's just, she said everybody at school, mainly the boys, really have started it. And she said, but if you want to understand anybody or you want them to actually engage in a conversation, you've got no choice. Wow.
Did it happen overnight? Was it like, do you remember Kevin and Perry when Perry came back from Manchester one time and he turned into a little miniature Liam Gallagher?
It's been a kind of slow growth, but so I think the year that she's in now, year 10, and it's that, I do vaguely remember being that age, and there's lots of changes, and we're having the whole, she wants to be more independent and grown up and make her own decisions, all of that stuff. So I don't tend to ever put her down on it. I kind of, like I said, try to be educated so she can talk to me. And I kind of think, she'll grow out of it. But it's just interesting. I think more of it, like she herself knows some of it's quite ridiculous, because she said that the boys, basically, I said to your producer,
they're probably all putting it on a bit, aren't they? Probably.
Well, exactly. And at home, I can't believe they get away with it. But she said basically they all walk around school thinking they're living an episode of Top Boy.
I knew you were going to mention Top Boy, because I'm only recently into Top Boy, and I said to the producer, I said, I'm going to have to rely almost exclusively on Top Boy for working out
the right thing.
Yes.
This is exactly because they all walk around either they want to be a footballer or they want to be a roadman.
A roadman. It's bloody good, isn't it, Top Boy? There's no.
It's amazing.
Absolutely superb.
I watched it
television
with her.
Yes.
And it was incredible. And actually, the plot and the storyline, my husband was like, I am not watching that. He goes on the very kind of, he's quite posh, and he goes on the, I am not watching that rubbish. I can't understand a word of it. To which we just say, you sound like a really old white man.
Does your daughter, do you think she's got 2 or 3 levels? Do you think the way she would speak to people at school is going to be even more pronounced than the way she speaks to you?
Absolutely. I don't think I could bear it. I think if I actually overheard her in the playground, I would probably cry.
I think you're wonderful, because you're quite. You can't turn it into a big thing, can you? Because it becomes something, and then it becomes a bridge that they'll fight on, and so you just go along with it and give a little bit of guidance. But if you're walking into a job interview and you're using language that the job interviewer doesn't understand, then you're going to have a bit of a problem.
Well, this is what I'm saying. I sound like, surely when you grow up and you actually, I said, she wants to go to art college. I'm saying you cannot talk like that in your art college interview. And she just rolls her eyes and goes, well, of course.
Oh, bless her.
So I think...
well, we've always done this. It's codes as well, as Julie reminds me. Teenagers have always had code. You don't, in a way, you don't want to be like your parents, do you?
Well, fundamentally, to be honest, I think they're just a lot cooler and better at it.
Yeah,
because I remember we used to say watcher?
Watcher.
And we thought we were really cool.
Not
and
at my
mean
school.
Anything.
Not at my
really...
school, Sarah. You'd have been drummed out of the refectory if you spoke like that.
I'm sorry. But I think some of our language, we tried it. It was just wasn't very good.
I guess the closest I got was probably the language of rave culture, when some words, some verbs, and various little sort of codes were introduced there. But you're right. What a wonderful mum you must be to be so relaxed about it all, but also quite aware of what's going on. I can't believe that was your first call, and I'm confident it won't be your last. Sarah, have a great day. Mark's in Woodford. Mark, what would you like to say?
Yes, James. So this thing, as I said, as you've already highlighted, it's nothing new, but it is years of diversity and dominant street culture, often from the Black Caribbean culture infused with hip-hop, infused with the Cockney culture. And it's just the language of the young people. All the young people that I engage with, everyone speaks the same. I have a 21-year-old and a 23-year-old, and they speak it. A lot of my mates speak it. I mean, I'm close to your age. I'm 47. And I often catch myself saying it, them ones, you get me. Wagwan is the way I greet all of my friends. Maybe not some of my professional friends, but mostly it's... and
what about the doctors? What if you're down the doctors, Mark?
Well, James, I'm going to shock you, and the way I talk, I'm actually a criminal barrister.
No, I'm not shocked by that. I meant, what do you say to the doctor? Do you say Wagwan? I see what you mean. So do you say it to other criminal barristers?
Yeah. No, well, some, but generally, what happens now, sometimes there'll be interviews of people who have spoken like that in a police station. There's a lot of street dialect. It has to be transcribed, and then the poor prosecutor has to regurgitate it verbatim. In
that
court.
must be quite funny.
When they're trying to say this was the pengaling, the wagwan, and I want to put my head in my wig because it's so embarrassing. Honestly, once, and I kid you not, I actually delivered a closing speech using some of those slang words in a jury trial last year. Unfortunately, I got my client acquitted, but I saw the judge turn a shade of red.
I can well imagine
it really is becoming the dominant culture. I can see where, as much as you've got politics at the top levels trying to divide us, the youth, they don't see things like mine and your generation.
No.
It's just one culture. All the Asian, the black, the white kids, they speak exactly the same.
That's what's nice about it.
Culture,
it's
one
good
music.
Yeah, it's good to see multicultural being reclaimed as a positive after so many years of people trying to use it as a sort of racist pejorative. But you see, you're conscious of when you're doing it. You can still spot it. When you're with your kids, with your 21 and 22-year-old, are they like that 24/7? Do they talk to their grandma like that?
Yeah, well, my son won't talk to my grandma like that, but he talks to me like that, and I tell him not to do it. It is annoying. I'm conscious to an extent, but things like Wagwan, for example, is ingrained in black culture. I've said it from, I can't remember when, things like fist bumps and certain greetings. A lot of this comes from Jamaican patois, Caribbean patois, and it's just a cultural thing. But again, it's a melting pot. So you've got now what you find is the best of Cockney slang is infused with the Caribbean, and what's happened? It's just been one big mix, and it's street culture. A lot of it's been driven by music.
Yeah,
a lot
clearly.
Of these phrases have come from, I used to be a raver like you. I was a DJ back in the day, the hardcore, and it's gone through jungle, more phrases, UK garage, if you remember that, James, and then we've gone all the way up to drill and grime, and every kind of incarnation of dance music has come from new phrases, but the youth pick it up more and more.
It's having little codes to let other people know that you're part of the same movement or you're in the same tribe. Mark's just tweeted, I think James is having a midlife crisis live on the radio.
But James, one thing I'll say, people are talking about this Union Jack waving.
Yeah.
This language, this culture is British.
Yeah, you're right.
It is exclusively British, and it should be celebrated. This is what our youth have created.
That's a powerful paean. Final question. Would you advise, I mean, I agree with what you say, but I suspect you would advise a client, if they were capable of moderating their lingo slightly, when in court, you'd advise a client not to speak like that?
Depends what court they're in. London juries, London is perceived slightly differently, so you can get away with a lot more. When you're rural, if you're at Guildford Crown Court or perhaps Leamington Spa or Warwick, then maybe I'd have a word with the client and ask them to refine it. But in London, I think people are just used to it. And I think what's happening is certain barristers that have come to court and started reciting Shakespeare, for example, are now looked upon with like they're somewhat weird, whereas people who speak with just normal, natural like myself is the
getting more and more common, which makes courts a less intimidating place and more accessible place. If only there were enough courts and enough lawyers to actually deal with some of the backlog, particularly in your sector, the criminal justice sector. Mark, thank you, mate. That was an absolute masterclass in what is going on and what it might mean in terms of the broader picture. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. 12:30 is the time, and Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. 32 minutes after 12 is the time. You'll recall when I was talking to Natasha earlier from the Grenfell Action Group, or Grenfell survivors, they have often mentioned Hillsborough and indeed Aberfan as worrying precedents as to what might happen in their fight for justice. You'll know it's 5 years since that tragedy killed 72 people, and so far no arrests, and thousands remaining trapped in unsafe homes across the country. I also mentioned that Rachel Venables had perhaps done more than anyone else in the British media to keep that story, or to bring that story to your attention and to keep it in the spotlight. And we're about to hear Rachel's look back over the last 5 years, but I would warn you first that some of the content within here is going to be upsetting, is going to be disturbing. This is me warning you that you might be upset by something you're about to hear, which, of course, according to the Daily Mail, is the end of civilization as we know it and must be described as a trigger warning. But every radio presenter you've ever heard ignorantly banging on about trigger warnings actually does them, because I don't want you, if you've got the kids in the car or if you are likely to be reminded of something traumatic from your own past, I don't want you to listen to this unwarned. And now you have been warned.
I actually remember when my mum pointed at the tower block when I was like 4 years old. She was like, that's where we're moving to. And I remember just looking at it thinking, wow, it's so big. It was home.
Fire brigade. Yeah, hello. Hi, in the fire, flat 16 Greenfield Tower.
In the early hours of the 14th of June 2017, a fire broke out in a fourth-floor flat at Grenfell Tower in West London. It was home to hundreds of people, including Zoe Dainton.
I opened the door and I was just greeted by basically thick black smoke. Made my way to the stairwell, made my way downstairs, and pretty much stood outside and watched it all happen for hours.
Well, it's towering inferno, isn't it? Possible.
Even the firefighters racing to the scene were horrified to see the flames shooting up the outside of the building. Residents were trapped and those stood out below were powerless to help.
You know, fire and that's getting bigger and bigger. People are going to die and I'm scared.
Over the coming days, desperate families searched for missing loved ones.
It's my mum, it's my sister, it's my niece, and my sister's husband.
All missing.
We
now know that 72 people lost their lives, including Shah's mother and aunt. He was on the phone to his mum as she died.
And the smoke suddenly got them. I mean, I heard every last breath she took. And I could hear him wheezing. She couldn't talk anymore.
Phase 1 of the Grenfell inquiry found systematic failings in the London Fire Brigade's response. They were telling people to stay in their flats long after they should have been getting them out.
LFB failed to revoke the stay put advice at a time when the stairs remained passable. Had it done so, more lives could have been saved.
But Chairman Sir Martin Morbick also found the flammable cladding was the primary cause of that rapid fire spread.
Because they did not adequately resist the spread of fire over them. On the contrary, They promoted it.
Phase 2 of the inquiry, still ongoing, found that the cladding and insulation manufacturers had exploited loopholes, one just rigging the tests to get their products passed as safe. And they've been wrapped around thousands of buildings across the country, creating a crisis, including Sophie Bitchener's block in Stevenage.
I've known that my building's been unsafe for almost 3 years now, and we've kind of just been waiting for the government to step in and help and make the people accountable for building this building kind of pay up.
And so, 5 years on, survivors fear another Grenfell is possible. And with no arrests so far, they fear their long road to justice makes them a new Hillsborough. Here's Zoe again with Tiago Alves, another survivor.
Justice for me has several meanings. Ultimately, it would be the people who are responsible for what happened that night and the death of our 72 loved ones. Ultimately, you know, they're punished for what happened.
This is the moment that Grenfell becomes historic as opposed to something in recent history. You look at Hillsborough, you look at the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, and one of the things that we've seen is that justice doesn't come easily.
And Rachel Venables joins me now.
Justice doesn't come easily. That felt like the right way to end a very difficult look back on the past 5 years. Impossible, of course, to pack everything in. We've learnt so much, and you could argue so little has changed. But today on the anniversary, every year on the anniversary, the focus for the survivors is on the 72 lives lost. And increasingly, year after year, they're becoming more and more focused on that concept of justice and the gap between what they see as justice, what they want, and what they're increasingly starting to believe they will actually get.
Justice delayed is justice denied, of course, in many people's minds. I think I know the answer to this question, but a lot of people listening may not. What do they want?
They want criminal accountability. They want a belief and understanding in what happened that night and that the people responsible face some sort of punishment.
Because it was a consequence, they believe, with, in my view, insurmountable amounts of evidence. It was a consequence of decisions taken and actions made. It was not an act of God, to use a legal term, or a tragic accident.
Yeah, this wasn't an accident. This wasn't something that you can look back and say, like an earthquake or a tsunami that happened to kill and devastate a community. This is something that the inquiry has forensically uncovered was the culmination of 1,000 different bad decisions, hundreds of individuals who, one by one, made a really small error, mistake, deliberate intervention, cut a corner. If you have everybody cutting corners, nobody walks straight. So many issues, and some people who, varying levels of accountability, from the regulations to the politicians to the people who designed the products to the people who were responsible for passing the products. It's not for you and I, it's not for the survivors to say who is or isn't culpable, but there is a real sense out there that people must be.
Somebody has to be.
And they want that. They want their day in court. The inquiry has delayed the Metropolitan Police's investigation. They want that to be sped up.
Right.
And they talk about justice being the change. You mentioned earlier when you spoke to Natasha Elcock about how they want to make sure that the 72 people who died don't just represent what went wrong, but also what changed, what was fixed for good, and they don't see enough happening there either.
Well, you may have just answered my next question. Is there any, from following the inquiry more closely than most and being in touch with people from all angles, as it were, are there many grounds for optimism that justice will be seen to be done?
I think that's a really difficult question.
Of course it is.
I think a lot of people have been, and I realise I'm speaking here for a large group of individuals who'll have very different opinions. Yes. Quite a few of the people I've spoken to have been almost pleasantly surprised, if that's the right word, about how much the inquiry has been able to uncover, and horrified in equal measure by all of those, damning developments. Where they're really disappointed is that the way the inquiry was set up, with the Met Police's investigation being delayed until the investigation is ongoing, but charges and the like won't come until after the inquiry. They were told that was to allow the inquiry to do its work, to make its recommendations and to make changes. And so far, those recommendations haven't been brought in. So again, Natasha mentioned in the past hour a recommendation for disabled residents in high-rise buildings. Just a month ago, the government decided not to accept that. And that is something that many residents just react with horror to. They think, well, what's the point of the inquiry if it's going to make a recommendation that the government don't accept? In the government's defence, they would say they've introduced a consultation on a new proposal. They say that what was put forward wasn't proportionate or practical, but therein you see the issues.
You do, and a lot of people mentioning how grateful they are to you for keeping them abreast of this story, as indeed you will continue to do so in your new role here at LBC.
Yes.
Rachel's probably embarrassed for me to mention that she's just had quite a big promotion, which is richly deserved.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for all that you do. 12:41 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The comedian Frankie Boyle has knitted together two of the conversations we've been having on the programme today in a tweet that simply says, the Rwanda flight on the anniversary of Grenfell says everything about the direction we've travelled in the last 5 years, which is certainly food for thought. 12:41 is the time. Much lighter note, of course, the conversation that we're having about so-called multicultural London English. Shane in Surrey says, the comedian Mo Gilligan, he's a genius, that guy. I don't know if you've seen his chat show on Channel 4. It's absolutely brilliant. And oddly enough, given that we were talking about Top Boy earlier, a recent episode had Ashley Walters on it and featured Michael McIntyre trying to talk like a character in Top Boy, which actually is bang on the kind of message that this entire conversation has been about. It was as funny as it sounds. He has a bit in his latest special, Shane tells us, about code switching, depending upon who he was actually talking to when working in a high-end store would dictate how he talks. It was really funny, but also eye-opening. And a pal of mine, another Keith, I forgot to tell this Keith, I've got another friend called Keith. I saw him on Saturday. I haven't seen him for years. But he's two Keiths, I know, it's incredible, both under 50. Actually, I don't know if the other one is under, it might be roundabout. Anyway, and he says, I thought I was down with the Ute them. And then I got into an argument once with a roadman, and I asked him to clarify what he was saying. And he said, I can speak official too, blood. And then spoke in a manner akin to a 1950s BBC presenter. So that would be code switching, I believe. Shoshana is in Enfield. Shoshana, what would you like to say?
Hi, good afternoon, James.
Hello.
I'm a first-time caller.
Welcome.
Thank you. If it's okay with you, I just want to say that my thoughts and my hearts and my prayers, it goes out to those affected regarding Grenfell.
Of course.
I'm not in their shoes. I mean, yes, I also have a physical disability as well too. So I think about how I would have managed. So yeah, my thoughts and my heart goes out to them because they're in a rotten situation, and I do hope that they get the justice that they so deserve.
Me too. Beautifully put, Shoshana. Thank you.
Thank you. What I was calling about is this lovely linguistics.
Yeah.
You get me, no blood. And this is exactly what I mean. It's a case of, say, for example, I mean, I was born here.
Right.
My parents sent me to school in Jamaica.
Ah.
So I've got the best of both worlds. So I've got the patois, then I've got the English. But I've also travelled as well too and picked up some slang terms, some of them not exactly very appropriate for this time of day.
Don't get me into trouble.
So I won't be going down that road.
Thank you.
But what I will say is that, say, for example, in the bus in Jamaica, we say, one stop driver. That means basically, next bus stop, I'm getting off.
Yes.
We're over here, you say that, the driver's like, huh? What did you just say? I don't know what that means. But with the mishmash of I do pidgin Nigerian very well.
Okay.
But it doesn't make me Nigerian.
No one's saying it does. I think it's more... I mean, what you've really driven home is how commonplace and normal code switching is. It's just that some of the codes have changed. Jax points out everyone's mum used to have a telephone voice. It's just changing the way you speak.
So does my mum.
There you go.
My mum has a telephone voice, and I can tell you this. My parents did not and would not have me speaking anything other than English. Because
Sure.
at the end of the day, even speaking Patois, yes, Patois is our slang in Jamaica. Jamaica's second language is actually Spanish.
Right.
But if you go to work in Jamaica and you say to your boss, "What boss? Morning, boss," he's going to look at you like, "I beg your pardon." So you need to be very careful who you speak certain dialects to.
But that
might
change. No, I hear you. But that might change. I mean, the reading into this article, the suggestion is that some of these barriers, if there are barriers, will actually come down. Because you're talking about being judged negatively according to how you speak.
I don't think it would be appropriate.
No, okay.
At the risk of everybody beating me now. But I'm not sure it's an appropriate thing. The reason why is at the end of the day, we speak English.
Yes.
Yes, we have Cockney. And we have all these slang terms that our young people have picked up from grime, from R&B music. Like Sean Paul, for example, he had a song out called "Give Me the Ting."
Yes.
Some people wouldn't understand what "Give Me the Ting" means. Some people would understand.
I could have a fair crack at it, I think.
Yeah, you can't say to a girl in a romantic encounter on your date, "What, girl? Give me the ting." That is so inappropriate.
Yes.
And she would walk off and leave you. So what I'm saying is, my question I'm going to throw out to everybody then:
Go on.
Are we losing ourselves?
Oh.
Are we sinking into a void of non-maleficence where we are becoming so transparent that we don't see ourselves anymore and something else is now coming in to take our place? And if that be the case, that would be a shame because the English language is beautiful. Look how many people come over here to learn
well, you're not going to get any criticism from me. I'm less worried than you are, but you're closer to the action than I am, so your concerns are probably more pertinent than mine are. But I mean, we've had. I mean, language evolves, as you know. You'd struggle to understand Chaucer in its original delivery, or Beowulf, or even Shakespeare. Yes. But I don't think the suggestion is that this is going to replace all other ways of talking. Just that it's going to become a lot more widespread and commonplace than it currently is.
But if it becomes more widespread and commonplace, then yes, the snobbery is there. Number one, and number two, as somebody who works in the NHS, I've been in the NHS nearly 15 years.
Right.
I nearly died from COVID.
Gosh.
So I'm actually off sick at the moment.
Okay.
If I spoke to the consultants in a slang term, and a snobbery comes in, they'll either say to me, "What on earth are you saying?"
And you're setting yourself
back. Or they'll be like, "Yes."
I hear you.
And it is seen as a Cockney, Patois, Pidgin English, they are slangs. And as much as our young people, as I've worked with young people in church as well too, they've cultivated this mishmash, which I think is brilliant. But you cannot mix oil and water.
Oh, beautifully put again. Thank you, Shoshana. I mean, I think you're right, although I would remind you of what Mark was saying about the difference simply in courts with juries. With a London jury, not likely to read too much into this manner of speaking, but if you were down in Leamington Spa, then they probably would. 12:49 is the time. 12:52 is the time. Some breaking news being reported by the BBC that Downing Street has said the flight to Rwanda may not take off today. Last time I checked, we were looking at, I think, a maximum of 7 people being on it, but there will be some more legal challenges, I think, to be heard before that first flight. We've been unable, despite our best endeavours, to come up with any reasons to support this disgusting scheme that don't sound disgusting. And that's fine, because the world contains disgusting things and people who enjoy disgusting things. And that's the point that perhaps needs to be driven home. It is absolutely normal to be disgusted by these things, but it is equally normal, in the sense of commonplace, to love the idea of people being sent to Rwanda against their will. In return for, and accepted in Rwanda in return for money. So people essentially being, in a sense, being sold, if you like, against their will to Rwanda, because the people at the other end get money and they get the people as well. remarkable state of affairs. 12:53 is the time. We're going to run out of time on this. We must come back to it because it's been highly entertaining. Sally says, damn it, James, I've only just switched on and I've missed the language hour. I just wanted to say it will take more than 100 years to eradicate the black country accent, and thank God for that. I completely concur. Julian's in East Ham. Julian, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. Pleasure to speak with you.
Likewise.
Completely agree with everything that your last caller said.
Shoshana.
Really some compelling points that she was making. So I'm a black guy who's grown up in London. Interestingly, I went to a really middle class secondary school. Did my 5 years, completely fine. It was only when I got to sixth form that people used to start picking me up on the way that I spoke. In particular, sort of that I did not, as a black guy from London, talk as I should. There wasn't enough street vocabulary and I'm not really exaggerating when I say that either. I didn't say a lot of the a lot of the common phrases that that were just casually sort of just circulating around. And I actually had to go through this process of deconstructing the way that I spoke, just because at the time I wanted to fit in, and you kind of feel like you're not really when you sound like you growing up in Richmond. No offense to people who grew up in Richmond.
It's a minefield.
Honestly. And, Facebook does this thing.
And did you, and you did switch. Do you still switch?
I do. Especially so I completely deconstructed the way I spoke, for 2 years I was in sixth form, to the point where it was flawless. My street language, was absolutely flawless. And when I got to uni, I actually had to tune up my my kind of speaking again because it needed to. I was writing essays and accidentally sometimes putting words in which I'd very, deliberately kind of just casualized, on Facebook, and Facebook does that thing where it shows you a post from 10 years ago, and I just used to look at them and think, oh my God, I really went to a lot of effort to
Did your mum ever? Did you get picked up by a parent on it ever, or anything like that?
Oh, it's like your previous caller was saying. As soon as I walked in through those doors, as soon as I got home,
back on your P's and Q's.
Back on my P's and Q's. But even then, I couldn't. I still had to rough up my English just a little bit because I'm a first generation sort of born to African parents. So I couldn't speak perfectly because they might misunderstand or not quite get what I'm saying sometimes. So even then, I had to work out just a little bit to fit in.
Do you share Shoshana's concerns about it? Because I don't at the moment worry, as she does, that it's going to involve some sort of dilution of who and what we or you are. Did you?
My primary concern comes from, and it's something that I speak with my partner about, is that when you talk to young people, and my partner's a teacher, so she's sort of on the front line there, they don't have they can't code switch. They don't. The street language is their only way of speaking.
So and then they're going to have to deal with. I mean, it's unfair, but all prejudice is unfair. They're then going to have to deal with the prejudices of people who do look down their noses at it or do look askance at it. And these kids won't be able to switch in and out of that mode. I think that's a really important point. Julian, thank you. Colin is in Bishop Stortford. Colin, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Great show as normal.
It's all right.
For me, it's like a 360 turnaround. Because I remember when I was younger and going to school, it'd be like speaking English at school and coming home and being a son of a Jamaican parents, speaking patois at home. So they'd be like going to school and saying, "What's your mate?" And they'd say, "Yeah, how you doing?" I'd say, "Yeah, all right." But then when I'm with my mates, it'd be "Wagwan." Yeah? Nothing more than stuff, Or no, go on.
That you're right. That's like the reverse. Gosh. Or is it a reverse, or is it not a blending? Has not the "What's your mate" now married the Wagwan?
Well, it kind of stands for the same thing. I think "What's your mate" was like our time. I'm talking sort of late 70s, early 80s, But for me, my oldest daughter now, she's in her early 40s. And I can remember when she was 8 playing with her mates who were Jewish, Greek, Turkish, Indian, Asian and stuff. And they'd all sound the same.
Yeah.
So they would be talking bear things are going, And Yeah, meet me at the club tonight. Yeah, big man day out and all them sort of something there. So it's like...
I like that, though. I like that. It's a democratising development, isn't it? It's actually breaking down barriers between sections of society, although I do understand where Shoshana was coming from. Colin, thank you. I don't imagine there's much call for patois in Bishop Stortford, is there?
Well, you'll be surprised. You'll be surprised. Yeah, every now and then you come up with someone say, yeah, you could say it. But yeah, I think for me, because I sort of like lived in town, come out of town, it's easy for me to switch.
You can slide in and out.
The difference is people who live in the inner city and don't get out of it much.
Yes.
They'll probably be more on the sort of new thing, the new sort of language.
And they don't have the options. Code switching is good because it enables you to move stealthily between social groupings and all over the place. Thank you. I'd have been a dreadful one for this when I was a kid. I'm just thinking what I would have been like. Obviously, I grew up in the countryside, in the Worcestershire countryside, but I'd have been all in. Absolutely all in on this stuff. And my late father would have looked at me like he looked at me when I got off the bus at Digbeth coach station wearing jeans that I just bought at Hyper on Kensington High Street that already had holes in them. And trying to explain to my dad why I'd bought jeans that already had holes in them is a look on his face that I will never forget. And I've caught it on my own face sometimes with my daughters. But you've done what, son? You've bought someone else's old kecks with holes already in them, which I think may have cost more at that point than a new pair of Levi's. Anyway, that's it from me for another day. Here's Sheila Fogarty.
God, I bet you were insufferable.
You ain't seen nothing yet.
That was a really interesting call because in Liverpool, the word all right means about 50 different things. And if you're not from Liverpool, you'd wonder what everybody was doing when they're saying, all right, meaning hello. All right, meaning all right, back off. All right, meaning goodbye. All right, meaning I understand. It means so many different things.
All right.
Thanks very much, James.
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 All right.
Thanks very